Welcome to G3 TV, where African stories come to life. Don't forget to subscribe and comment where you are watching from. In the village of Umwakagu, nestled between whispering forests and hills that hummed old songs with the wind, lived a man named Ezeania. He was not the richest man, but he had enough. Enough land to feed 10 mouths, enough yams in his barn to last 3 seasons, and enough wisdom to make the elders nod when he spoke. But what Ezeania did not have, what kept his mouth cold at night and his heart echoing with silence, was a wife. He was not without options. Ezeania was a fine man, tall and brown like roasted maize, with shoulders strong from years of farming and a smile that could calm a crying child. Many mothers in the village had whispered his name while fetching water, nudging their daughters and giving sideways glances. But Ezeania had refused all offers. He said, "A woman is not chosen by sight alone. Beauty fades, but character walks with you in the dark." So he waited. One dry season, when the earth cracked and the rivers receded like frightened animals, Ezeania announced something that sent tongues wagging and eyebrows flying. He had chosen not 1, but 4 young women to come and live in his compound for a season. These women, handpicked from different villages, were known for their beauty, elegance, and charm. Each one had been approached quietly and told, "Ezeania is looking for a wife, not just any wife, but the one whose heart can stand both sunshine and storm." They agreed. And so, one by one, the women arrived. Edeora, from the north side of the hills, was the first. Her skin glowed like shea butter in sunlight, and her voice was as soft as fresh egusi soup. She walked like a queen but laughed like a child. Then came Kem, tall and confident, her eyes sharp like the tip of a new broom. She had lived in the city and returned with stories of offices, elevators, and restaurants that served chicken with tiny forks. Chisholm came next, gentle, quiet, and slow to speak. She was the daughter of a healer and carried the scent of herbs and roots wherever she went. The last was Amoka, bold and beautiful, with a mouth that knew no breaks. She spoke her mind with the force of a river, and her presence filled every space like incense smoke. Ezeania welcomed them with grace and clarity. He said, "You will live here, eat here, and walk here. I will observe. I will not judge by beauty, but by the strength of spirit. At the end of the 3rd moon, I will choose." The village erupted. "What kind of test is this?" some asked. "Does he think women are yams to be tasted one by one?" Others leaned in closer, eager to see what would unfold. Some supported him, saying he was wise, trying to avoid marrying a snake in human skin. Others cursed him under their breath, calling him proud. But the women stayed. Each had her reasons. Edeora had grown up poor and saw this as a chance to rise. Nkem wanted to prove that a city girl could win a village man's heart. Chisholm, quiet as she was, had dreams of healing a home, not just people. Amoka came for the challenge. She wanted to win, and she never lost. Life in Ezeania's compound was quiet at first. The women stayed polite, like cats studying each other before a fight. But beneath the calm, a silent war brewed, one of glances, half smiles, and sweet words aimed not just at Ezeania, but at each other. Ezeania, for his part, remained distant. He spent most days in the farm, returning late and tired, only to sit and watch them as they cooked, cleaned, and interacted. He said little, but so much. One day, a test came, but not from him. A child wandered into the compound, crying, his leg bleeding from a cut. He had been playing by the river and slipped on a rock. The women rushed to the scene. Edeora screamed. Nkem looked for help. Amoka backed away and shouted orders. But Chisholm knelt. She tore her wrapper. The arrival of the 4 women stirred the village like wind through dry leaves. Mothers peeked from behind raffia blinds, young girls whispered excitedly, and even elders at the palm wine shed paused their calabashes media to catch a glimpse of the beauties who had come to win a man's heart, or perhaps, his fortune. They were different in ways that made people wonder if they had come from the same land at all. Adis, the first, carried herself like a queen returned from exile. Her hair was always braided to perfection, and she spoke softly but with confidence that made people lean in when she talked. Ugochi, the second, was fierce like midday sun, bold, assertive, and the kind to speak her mind without a stammer. Chinelo, the third, was gentle and shy, her voice barely louder than the rustle of dry leaves. She seemed like the kind who would apologize to a stone if she tripped on it. And then there was Ifunanya, whose laughter echoed like wind chimes in the harmattan breeze, playful, unpredictable, and warm. Ekozona did not tell them why they were there, not exactly. He simply welcomed them into his compound with a smile and said, "You will stay with me for some time. Let the days speak for themselves." Each woman was given her own small room in his father's old house, and food was prepared by an elderly woman who once nursed Ekozona's mother. No chores were assigned, no expectations laid out. It was the strangest kind of silence, the kind that makes people show their true nature. At first, the women tiptoed around one another like strangers waiting for a festival to begin. But as days passed, layers began to peel. Adi spent her time tending flowers behind the house, humming songs from her childhood. Ugochi questioned everything, why there were no clear rules, why no one was cooking, why the walls needed repainting. Chinelo kept mostly to herself, helping the old woman in the kitchen even though no one asked. And Ifunanya danced alone in the compound at dusk, saying, "Let my feet speak to the spirits of this land." Ekozona watched. He said little but noticed much. He saw how Adis comforted the crying child of his neighbor without waiting to be thanked. He noticed how Ugochi nearly fought a drunken man who insulted Chinelo during market day. He watched Chinelo return from the stream with more water than anyone else had carried, quietly, her wrapper soaked with effort. And he smiled when he caught Ifunanya giving her roasted plantain to a hungry stranger who hadn't asked. But he also saw the shadows. He saw how Adis sometimes stared into the distance as though running from something invisible. He saw Ugochi's anger flash even at the smallest provocation. He saw Chinelo hide a torn letter behind the cooking shed. And he noticed Ifunanya sneak out at night, returning with dust on her feet and mischief in her smile. One night, he called them together. The first day belonged to Adis. She wore a soft blue wrapper and tied her scarf in a way that made her look like a painting from a shrine wall. Ekozona took her to the farm, where cassava roots waited in the soil like sleeping giants. She looked at the cutlass in her hand and smiled faintly. "I haven't done this in years," she admitted, kneeling beside him. "But I remember how my grandmother used to sing while walking. Shall I sing for you?" She sang, and her voice floated through the air like a forgotten lullaby. They walked side by side, sweat mixing with laughter. When they rested beneath the mango tree, she spoke of her father, who lost everything in a land dispute, and her mother, who sold groundnuts in traffic until her back gave out. Her beauty had opened doors, but her spirit had carried burdens. "I am not fragile," she said, holding his gaze. "I only carry my strength like silk." Ekozona nodded, moved. He saw in her a woman with pain folded neatly behind elegance, like clothes packed for a journey. And when they returned to the compound, he thanked her, not just for the day, but for her truth. The second day belonged to Ugochi. She wore trousers, yes, trousers, and declared, "Today, we'll paint the wall behind the house. I'm tired of looking at it." Ekozona chuckled but said nothing. He fetched buckets of whitewash while she rolled up her sleeves. They walked fiercely, like competitors in a race, paint splattering their arms and clothes. Ugochi talked fast, laughed hard, and pushed him to talk about things he usually kept buried. You always look like you're thinking 3 thoughts at once, she said. But do you ever shout? Or laugh till your ribs ache? By mid-afternoon, they were covered in paint and breathless from laughter. She challenged him, teased him, questioned him until he admitted things even his own brothers didn't know. She made him feel like no wall was high enough to hide behind. And yet, at sunset, as they watched the wall dry, she turned serious. Ekozona, if you pick me, you'll never be bored. But I won't bow where I should stand. I won't shrink to fit into tradition. He respected her fire. But fire, he knew, could both warm and burn. On the 3rd day, it was Chinelo's turn. She arrived quietly with a calabash of palm wine and said, "Let's sit by the stream. I brought stories instead of plans." The stream behind the village murmured like a grandmother. They sat on a flat stone, bare feet in the water, sipping slowly. Chinelo told him about her childhood, her love for weaving, and how she'd once been engaged to a man who died 2 weeks to the wedding. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. "I came here not to compete," she said. "But because something told me you were a man who listens." And he did listen. She had a softness that wrapped itself around silence, and a steadiness that made the air feel less heavy. When they walked back under the soft light of dusk, she held his hand, not tightly, but gently, like a question waiting for an answer. And then came Ifunanya. She arrived barefoot, as usual, carrying a basket of smoked fish and kola nuts. "Today," she said, "we shall visit the shrine, the stream, and the market. I want you to know the things that make me laugh and cry." They went to the shrine, where she whispered a prayer. At the stream, she sang to the water. In the market, she danced with an old drummer until people clapped and joined them. She was unpredictable, one moment joking, the next thoughtful. At one point, she turned to him and said, "You think life should follow order, Ekozona. But sometimes, joy lives in chaos. If you marry me, I will never be boring. But I will never be ordinary." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was filled with thought. The next morning, he called all 4 women to the compound. The villagers had heard whispers and gathered silently behind trees and fences. Chickens clucked. Children held their breath. Even the Eudora tree stood still. Ekozona stood before them and said, "I thank each of you. You came here strangers and have become part of my story. I have not chosen a wife. I have seen 4 women with 4 different truths. But I have chosen who I must walk beside." He turned to Chinelo. "I choose you." Gasps rippled through the air like a sudden wind. Chinelo's hands flew to her mouth, and tears brimmed in her eyes. "You did not shout, but you were heard," he said. "You did not force your way, but your presence filled the room. You brought peace in a house full of questions." Adi smiled and nodded. Ugochi sighed deeply but walked away with her head high. Ifunanya laughed, kissed Chinelo's cheek, and said, "I always knew it. You two breed the same kind of quiet." The villagers erupted in joy. Drums rolled. Women ululated. Old men nodded with approval. Months later, they married under the shade of that same Eudora tree. The storyteller from the next town came and said, "This one will become a tale our children will tell under moonlight." And indeed, it did. Ekozona and Chinelo didn't live a perfect life, but they lived an honest one. And every evening, when the sun dipped low and shadows danced on the walls, they would sit beneath the tree with their children and begin. "Let me tell you about the time your father tested for women." And the children would listen, wide-eyed, knowing that this tale was not